Hi everyone, Angela here. To make my stiff placemats, I'm using this fusible heavyweight stabilizer with glue on one side. It's smooth and ultra firm. It feels like a dense felt. This is the Legacy Fusion Shape 1, which is the same as the Pellon Peltex one. You can also just use an extra thick fusible interfacing. You can make your placemats any size. I'm cutting out my stabilizer 19 inches wide by 13 inches long. Next, I'll be cutting out some Heat & Bond Lite iron-on adhesive. It's like a sheet of glue with a paper backing. I'm using my stabilizer piece as a pattern, but I'm going to move it over so that I'm cutting out the adhesive 1/4 inch narrower and 1/4 inch shorter. Double check that the adhesive is slightly smaller than the stabilizer and trim if you need to. To make coasters, cut the stabilizer and the adhesive 4.5 inches square. For the fabric, I'm using 100% quilting cotton that I've pre-washed and pressed. You'll need 2 pieces for each placemat. Square off the bottom edges and trim away the selvages. You need to cut your fabric bigger than your stabilizer so that you have 1/2 inch seam allowance all around. So for these, I'm cutting my fabric 14 inches by 20 inches. For the coasters, cut 2 pieces of fabric 5.5 inches square. If you're using a lighter colored fabric on one side, start by flipping that one over with wrong side up. Fold in half to find the center at the bottom and make a little crease. From the center, mark 4 inches on either side for an opening. Clean off any fluff from the back of the fabric and from both sides of the stabilizer. There's nothing worse than finding little bits stuck in between after you've finished your project. Center the stabilizer onto the fabric with glue side down and clip together if you need to at the top and bottom. Carefully flip over so that the fabric is on top and remove the clips. Check that you have 1/2 inch of fabric all around from the stabilizer. Spray some water on top of the fabric or use a damp pressing cloth. Start in the center and press each section about 10 to 15 seconds without pushing the iron. You want to lift the iron and move to the next section. Flip over again and then center on the iron-on adhesive with the paper side up. Check to make sure that all the edges are inside the stabilizer, then press together. Again, press and hold for a few seconds on each section. I cut the adhesive smaller so that you can clearly see the edges of the stabilizer. With right sides together, place this on top of the other fabric piece, matching all the edges, then clip all around. Start sewing from this mark around to this mark, back tacking at the start and finish, leaving an 8 inch opening. Prepare the fabric the same way for the coasters, but on each piece, find the edge that runs along the lengthwise grain that doesn't stretch as much. Place these edges together, mark 1 inch from the top and bottom for the opening, then clip together. I'm using the Juki TL-2010Q sewing machine. The link for this and the tools I use are down in the description below. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, click the link for Echidna Sewing and Juki Junkies for North America. Start the sewing from that first mark and have the edge of the stabilizer in line with the inner left edge of the presser foot. Start by back tacking and then stitch right beside the edge of the stabilizer all the way to the end of the fabric. Fold the seam allowance over straight along the stitch line and hold tight. Start the next side with a back tack and continue stitching to the end of the fabric. Repeat for the other corners and then finish with a back tack at the second mark. This method will give you perfect corners. Trim all the corners on an angle, making sure not to cut any of the stitching, then trim the excess that's close to the seam. On each side, peel back the paper about 1/2 inch from the edge. Fold the seams over and press along the edge. Just use the top point of your iron, making sure not to iron over any of the adhesive glue. Once you're done all the sides, open up the fabric at the opening and flatten out that one layer. Peel away the paper and then go in through the opening to turn it right side out. Because the stabilizer is so stiff, I find the best way to do each corner is to push it in and then carefully pull it out through the opening. You really don't want to put any stress on the edges of the opening, as you can rip the fabric. If you're finding this video helpful, make sure to like, share, subscribe, turn on all notifications, and leave a comment below. To push out the corners, I use a knitting needle that's not too pointy. I gently slide the knitting needle from both sides to push it out. If your corner's a bit stubborn, use the point of a pin or needle to gently pull the fabric out. Fold in the seam allowance at the opening and press so that the edges are even. Make sure the edge is smooth and straight. Press this fabric to the stabilizer and then clip the opening. The seams should be centered along the edges. To help keep my top stitching straight, I'm switching to another presser foot. It has an edge guide to sew 1/16 of an inch from the edge. It's the SP18 1/16. Start by back tacking at the opening while holding on to the top and bottom thread. Place the edge of the placemat right against the guide. Continue pushing the edge along the guide, stop just before the corners, have your needle down, and pivot. Finish the top stitching with another back tack, then trim the threads. Give both sides another good press, making sure that the fabric is glued down to the stabilizer. I just love that you don't see any seam allowance underneath this lighter fabric and that it's hardly even noticeable on the other side. The coasters are sewn exactly the same way to give you that nice stiff finish. Be sure to have a look at some of my other tutorials, such as the Christmas tree napkin or hanging tea towels. Thanks again for watching, take care, and happy sewing!